For nearly 9 years, the bodies appeared one by one. 23 young men left along isolated tracks, drainage ditches, and waterways in the deepest parts of Louisiana. The pattern was invisible at first. A man cruising familiar streets, stopping where hustlers gathered, where the homeless waited, where no one asked questions. When investigators finally began to suspect a serial killer, the idea felt wrong. The man they would eventually meet looked nothing like the violence they were chasing. There was no obvious monster here, no single mistake that should have given him away. The first name on the list was 19-year-old David Levon Mitchell. He disappeared while hitchhiking home from a wedding in St. Charles Parish. 2 days later, his body was found on an abandoned stretch of road. At the time, it didn't trigger alarms. It was treated as a tragic accident. Another young man lost on the margins. 5 months later, just 6 miles away, another body surfaced. 20-year-old Gary Pierre, left near a trash dumpster discarded like refuse. This time, something didn't sit right. The autopsy showed he had been restrained before he died. No one imagined how big this would become. They focused on identification, on where these men came from, on who might miss them. 7 months passed. Less than 5 miles from where Pierre was found, another body appeared. 38-year-old Larry Ransom, placed deliberately outside a dumpster just like the others. The location mattered. These were places where the bodies would be noticed quickly. Someone would see them by morning. Ransom fit the emerging profile. Homeless, deeply involved with drugs, unreported missing. But there was a crucial difference. He had been beaten severely. The autopsy suggested he fought back. This could no longer be dismissed as misfortune. The sheriff's office opened a full investigation, and the bodies kept coming. They appeared in clusters now. Industrial sites, wasteland, abandoned corners of Jefferson Parish an hour from where the first victims were found. Some showed signs of sexual assault. Others had been bound. Most had died from asphyxiation. Investigators collected everything: hair fibers, biological evidence. DNA profiles began to form. There was mitochondrial DNA from hair, nuclear DNA from seminal fluid, a genetic presence without a name. The man responsible wasn't in any database. Outside the investigation rooms, the public barely noticed. These killings didn't ignite outrage. The victims were marginalized, men living high-risk lives, people many chose not to see. But reporters were starting to notice patterns. Young black men, lean builds, often homeless, often addicted. Men drifting through the night between 10 and 2, climbing into trucks with strangers because they had no other way to get where they needed to go. Invisible people. Another detail troubled investigators. Despite their size and youth, most victims showed little sign of struggle. No defensive wounds, no prolonged fights. Profilers imagined someone large, physically dominant, a man capable of overwhelming his victims with sheer force. They had no idea how wrong that picture was, because the man responsible lived quietly among them, a loner, unremarkable, barely noticed. Ronald Dominique. He lived in a trailer on his sister's property, kept mostly to himself. No close friends, no lasting relationships. When investigators looked back into his past, a pattern of isolation emerged. Teachers remembered little. Employers barely noticed him. There were no strong impressions, only absence. He grew up poor education, low expectations, an aimless life shaped by feeling inferior. High school was brutal. He was bullied, confused about his sexuality. He didn't come to terms with it until much later. And his family life carried its own trauma, a moment so disturbing it would echo for decades. Despite everything, after graduating in the early 1980s, Dominique remained dependent, living with his mother, then his sister, drifting from one menial job to another. He felt unwanted, unattractive, unloved. Even when he finally came out, acceptance didn't follow. Not from the wider community, not even within the gay scene. He was still an outsider, still overlooked. And all the while, the killings continued. What investigators hadn't yet realized was that the mistake they were searching for, the crack in the pattern, was already there. They just didn't know where to look. He was short, obese, sickly looking, shy, or at least standoffish. Someone who complained quietly about his surroundings, about the food, about how things never seemed to go his way. There was nothing about him that felt dangerous. If anything, he looked like the kind of person who got picked on, not just because of his sexuality, but because of how he carried himself, his physical presence. Those who knew him struggled to describe anything memorable. No sharp edges, no charisma, no obvious charm. He blended in so completely that some referred to him as a gray person, someone who faded into the background, someone you barely noticed, even when he was standing right in front of you. And yet there was one place where Ronald Dominique changed: on stage. In the small clubs around Thibodeau, people remembered him differently. That was where he came alive, where he stopped shrinking. He loved performing as a female impersonator, dressing up, imitating a local female singer, inviting the crowd to laugh. He wasn't very good at it, but he kept doing it. Criminologists would later say that mattered, because in that moment on stage, Dominique was in control. He decided when people laughed. He chose how he was seen. Control, they believed, was the key. Rape, they would explain, isn't about sex. It's about power. And even in those performances, the framework was already there. At the same time, detectives were still nowhere near him. How long would it take before anyone connected this unassuming, unsuccessful man to a growing list of dead bodies? In 1998, 6 murders remained unsolved. Ronald Dominique wasn't even a name on a list. The killings continued. The gaps between them began to shrink, as if whatever drove him needed more frequent release. By the summer of 1999, 3 more bodies appeared in and around Kenner. Manuel Reed, Angel Maya, Mitchell Johnson, all strangled. One showed injuries consistent with sexual assault. Investigators wondered whether the killer felt comfortable now, whether he believed he couldn't be caught, or whether he was simply good enough to keep slipping away. There were mistakes. An autopsy on Manuel Reed revealed DNA, but once again it led nowhere. No match in the national database. That didn't mean the attacker was unknown to the justice system. It only meant his past hadn't been connected yet. Years earlier, in 1993, Ronald Dominique had taken a step that mattered. At 29, he moved out of his mother's home. Not far, just into a trailer parked on his sister's property. But for him, it was independence. Control. Investigators would later mark this as a turning point. Shortly after moving in, the trailer became the scene of an alleged rape. A man lured there with the promise of drugs, handcuffed, threatened with a gun. The victim went to police. No investigation followed. 3 years later, another man came forward. Same story. Same location. This time, the victim escaped through a window and ran into the street. Dominique claimed both encounters were consensual, that the men tried to rob him, that he only pulled a gun to protect himself. This time, police didn't believe him. He was arrested, spent several months in jail. The case fell apart when the victim couldn't be found. But something happened during that incarceration, something that would reshape everything that came after. Ronald Dominique was violently raped by another inmate. He suffered lasting injuries. According to police reports, he became terrified of ever going back to jail. Investigators believe that fear became his plan. If there were no witnesses, there would be no charges, no testimony, no prison. So he raped, and then he strangled. Not because killing was the goal, at least not at first. The sex act was the motive. The murder was insurance. Over time, that boundary blurred. What began as avoidance turned into escalation, and eventually into desire. The intervals shortened again, as if the process itself became addictive. Even investigators were stunned by the logistics, the strength it took, strangling grown men, lifting bodies, loading them into vehicles, dumping them in the dark. He didn't look capable of it. The answer, they believed, was adrenaline, a surge powerful enough to override his limitations. By the turn of the millennium, 9 men were dead, and Ronald Dominique was still invisible to law enforcement. Then another body appeared, 23-year-old Michael Vincent, left tangled in a barbed wire fence. Rope marks circled his wrists. Familiar. But something had changed. This time, the body wasn't in Jefferson or St. Charles Parish. It was found 40 miles south. The geography had shifted. Investigators began to think they were looking at 2 separate killers. two separate patterns. What they didn't realize was that the same man was simply moving, and he was far from finished. For detectives, it became a race against time. They worked day and night, always feeling 2 steps behind. Every lead chased hard, every theory tested. And still, they would wake up to news of another body. Then suddenly it stopped. For nearly 3 years, there were no new victims, no fresh crime scenes, no late-night calls. Investigators wondered if the killer had moved on, or if he had simply learned how to disappear. In October of 2002, the silence broke. Kenneth Randolph Jr. was found dumped in a sugarcane field behind a church. It was summer. The heat was brutal. His body had been there long enough to leave no doubt about what investigators were facing. One detective would later remember visiting the family home. The crowded rooms, the grief, the weight of telling parents their son wasn't coming back. 18 months passed before the next surge of violence. Larry Matthews, Michael Barnett, Leon Nettles, all men down on their luck, all killed, all discarded along the bayous of rural parishes over a 6-month stretch. Still no suspect, and the pace began to quicken. In April of 2005, 2 more bodies surfaced in the city of Homer. The first was 31-year-old August Watkins, a homeless man. The autopsy couldn't even determine how he died. The locations were always remote: sugarcane fields, ditches, under overpasses. In South Louisiana, heat and rain erased evidence quickly. Bodies decomposed, dump sites degraded. DNA didn't always survive. Sometimes there was nothing left to collect. In one case, a body was dumped inside an unused mini-storage unit. The door was closed. Days passed before it was discovered. By then, the scene was unusable. No gunshot wounds, no knives. Every death came down to strangulation. Days later, another victim appeared, 23-year-old Kurt Michael Coonham, one of 9 siblings, bound, strangled. That was the moment law enforcement realized they had to change tactics. A task force was formed. Multiple agencies came together: state police, the crime lab, probation, and parole. By May of 2005, they were staring at 18 unsolved murders. The evidence was overwhelming and confusing. Some victims were missing shoes. Others weren't. The media speculated about trophies. Detectives didn't buy it. They believed the killers simply didn't finish dressing his victims. Still, those details helped link cases that once seemed separate. A special incident room was set up. Walls covered with faces. 8x10 printouts, shoulder to shoulder. Every new victim meant another photo, another name, another failure. Within 6 weeks of launching the task force, another body was found. 34-year-old Alonzo Hogan. The calls never stopped. Tips poured in. Descriptions conflicted. Progress was painfully slow. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was the number. How many had already died? And how many more would follow before something finally broke? Then came a crack in the pattern. A man known on the street as Motormouth told his parole officer that someone had tried to tie him up. Just days later, the remains of 17-year-old Wayne Smith were found in a bayou, so badly decomposed that no cause of death could be determined. Another face went up on the wall, and then nature intervened. Hurricane Katrina hit. Everything stopped. Resources were scattered. Jurisdictions flooded literally and figuratively. Entire populations shifted overnight. Cities strained under sudden growth. Law enforcement priorities were pulled in every direction. Weeks later, another storm followed. More damage, more recovery. Through it all, the task force kept working. They knew one thing for certain: this killer wasn't successful every time. Not every encounter ended in death. That realization changed their approach. Probation and parole officers began asking questions. Quiet ones, casual ones. Was anything strange happening? Anyone acting unusual? Then another man vanished. 40-year-old Chris DeVillier disappeared while hitchhiking after the hurricanes. His body was found weeks later in a cane field. Less than a month after that, another victim, 21-year-old Nicholas Pellegrin. After his death, the killing seemed to stop again. Detectives worried the worst. Had the killer changed his methods? Was he hiding bodies now? How many deaths would never be linked? How many would never be found? That fall, another body surfaced. 27-year-old Christopher Satterfield, beaten, strangled. Then in November of 2006, the call came. A man named Ricky Wallace walked into his probation office with a story. He said a white man in a pickup truck had approached him, claimed a family member was being abused, and showed him a photograph. For the first time in years, detectives leaned forward, because this time, the killer hadn't finished what he started. Investigators would later learn that the photograph wasn't random. It belonged to a family member of the killer. He used her image as bait, telling men she was a victim of domestic abuse, afraid of other men, willing to pay for sex. In some cases, it was his niece's photograph. He would say, "This is my wife. This is what she looks like. She wants to meet you." The man who came forward, Ricky Wallace, actually got into the pickup truck, let Dominique drive him to the trailer. Inside, the story shifted. Before the woman could come in, Dominique explained he needed to tie him up because she was afraid of men. Wallace refused. That was when Dominique's tone changed. Suddenly, there was no tying up, no meeting, just an order to take him back where he'd been picked up. Wallace was on parole, so when he next met his parole officer, he told him what had happened. Detectives wanted everything. Wallace showed them the trailer. Bayou Blue Road, near Homer, across from rusting industrial buildings. They canvassed the area, spoke to neighbors. One man stood out, Ronald Dominique, unmarried, living in a trailer on his sister's property. Quiet, detached. Surveillance began. It went nowhere. He worked manual labor at an oil supply company, came home, stayed inside, didn't socialize, didn't go to bars. There was still nothing tying him directly to the bodies, and nothing about him looked threatening. He didn't frighten anyone, didn't intimidate, didn't dominate a room. 5'5", obese, passive. People described him as harmless. A man who called bingo, helped neighbors with groceries, mowed lawns. A bad heart, soft body. Nothing that suggested he could overpower anyone, let alone kill with his bare hands. But investigators knew appearances lie. Serial killers often blend in, and Dominique blended perfectly. What detectives could prove was geography. When Dominique was released from jail in November 1996, he returned to his sister's property in St. Charles Parish. Within a few hundred feet, bodies began appearing. 3 victims there, 6 more within a couple of miles. Then, in late 2002, the family moved south to Bayou Blue near Houma, and the bodies moved with them. The shift was exact, too precise to ignore. Still, coincidence wasn't proof. Dominique wasn't in the system. He'd been accused of rape, yes. That put him high on the radar. But there was nothing linking him to murder. So detectives made a decision. They would talk to him. 2 investigators paid him a visit. 1 female detective from Lafourche Parish, 1 male from Jefferson Parish. They told him they were investigating dumped bodies, that they were speaking to anyone with prior arrests in the parish. Dominique answered their questions calmly, denied everything. Then he agreed to a buccal swab. DNA. He didn't have to give it, but he did. Why he said yes, no one knows. Many early cases had no usable DNA. Exposure to water, heat, time. But later cases did. Dominique may not have realized he was the prime suspect, the only suspect. While the lab worked, detectives made one thing clear. There would be no more victims. The FBI stepped in. Round-the-clock surveillance. Cars, foot teams, binoculars, aircraft. Every movement watched. In late November 2006, the call came from the crime lab. The DNA matched. First Manuel Reed, found in a dumpster in Kenner in 1999. Then another match. DNA recovered from the body of 27-year-old Oliver LeBancs, found partially clothed near New Orleans in 1998. The case began to collapse inward. Dominique realized he was being followed, that arrest was coming. He left his sister's property, moved into a boarding house, a homeless shelter in downtown Homer. He didn't want his sister exposed. That's where police found him. December 1st, 2006, he didn't run, didn't resist. Officers were stunned. Just 2 weeks earlier, he had killed Christopher Satterfield, subdued him, tied him up, raped him, dragged his body to a dump site. Now, he could barely walk upright. Using a cane, the man who didn't look capable of killing anyone had finally run out of places to hide. He had to be helped into the car by two officers, barely able to stand, barely able to walk. But any doubts in the officers' minds vanished the moment he sat down in the interview room. Once the questions began, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The floodgates opened. Ronald Dominique talked and talked and talked. He didn't hedge. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hold anything back. He gave details, names, places, methods. Investigators would later say that in the earliest encounters, killing wasn't always his intent. At least not at first. The very first victim was picked up in the French Quarter. The plan was sex. Nothing more. They went somewhere secluded. They had sex. But the encounter turned rough. Dominique complained. The man didn't stop. That was when Dominique struck him in the head with a tire iron. When the man lost consciousness, something changed. For the first time, Dominique realized the pressure was gone. The resistance was gone. He strangled him, dumped the body, and walked away unnoticed. No one suspected him of anything. That realization reshaped everything. He learned he could have sex on his terms, with control, with power. In the early murders, everything happened inside a vehicle. Seatbelts became weapons, instruments of restraint. Control was always the point. He cruised areas where street hustlers gathered, stopped, talked, judged. If they agreed, they got in. Sometimes he took them to his trailer, other times somewhere remote. He told them he was afraid of being hurt, that he needed to tie them up so no one would hear. If they agreed, he bound them, raped them, strangled them, disposed of the body. If he thought the man was heterosexual, he changed the story, produced a photograph of an attractive woman, said she was his wife or his girlfriend, offered money. The photograph was his niece. He told them she was shy, that she'd been hurt before, that she was afraid of men. If they agreed to be tied up, he killed them. If they refused, he let them go. In Terrebonne Parish, where he was finally arrested, Dominique was charged with 8 murders. He confessed to all of them. Prosecutors sought the maximum penalty. His attorney knew what that meant. Multiple capital trials, years, decades of courtrooms. The families would be forced to relive everything, again and again. Many of them didn't want that. They didn't want to hear every detail. They wanted it to end. A deal was reached. Ronald Dominique pleaded guilty, avoiding trial, avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life without parole for each of the 8 murders, consecutive sentences, one after another. There would be no release, no appeal back into the world. Other jurisdictions left warrants open, just in case. Every victim had a family, people who loved them, who mourned them. Their lives mattered regardless of where they lived, how they survived, or how society saw them. For nearly a decade, Dominique killed in plain sight, invisible, overlooked, until one man survived. Investigators would later agree on this point. Ronald Dominique's greatest mistake was letting someone live long enough to tell the story. Ricky Wallace came forward, and with that, a decade of violence collapsed. One missed kill, one voice left alive. That was the mistake, the killer's mistake. When they realized she hadn't come home, the concern was immediate. This wasn't like Libby. She never disappeared without telling someone. Her housemates went out looking for her. They checked the takeaways she liked, the places she sometimes ended up late at night. When that didn't work, they got into a car and drove around, past bars, past friends' houses, anywhere she might be. As the hours passed, fear crept in. Using Libby's phone, they contacted her mother, told her she was missing, asked what they should do. Not long after, they called the police. In the early hours, a missing person investigation began. As officers searched, they started building a picture of who Libby Squire was. Her full name was Liberty Anna Squire, known to everyone simply as Libby. She was a second-year philosophy student from High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire, the eldest of 4 children. She was especially close to her mother. Libby's teenage years hadn't been easy. She'd struggled with her mental health. After her A-levels, she took time out, traveled, worked on herself. Going to university had taken courage. Leaving home, starting over. And she was thriving. She loved her studies, loved being social, throwing herself into student life. Bright, popular, engaged. Libby lived in a student house on Wellesley Avenue with a group of girls who were close friends. The house worked. They looked out for one another. Hull is a student city. Thousands live off campus, side by side with local residents. The relationship between town and gown was good. Detectives quickly found the taxi driver who had taken Libby home that night. He told them he'd dropped her off on Wellesley Avenue. As he drove away, he saw her walking toward her front door. But CCTV told a different story. Footage showed Libby turning around, walking away from home. Something had changed her mind. She didn't go inside. She fell in the road. Several times. A group of young men saw her. It was bitterly cold, below freezing. There were concerns she may already have been feeling the early effects of hypothermia. She staggered along the street, distressed, not making much sense. At one point, students nearby brought her into their house, asked if she was okay, but when she left, she dropped her keys. Without them, she had no way to get back inside her home. Disoriented, intoxicated, alone. The next morning, her keys on a pink keyring were found in the garden of her house. As the search intensified, the city responded. Students and residents rallied together. Leaflets were handed out. Billboards went up. Local reporters were soon joined by national media. From the geography alone, detectives knew options were limited. There was a small river nearby. It was searched thoroughly. Beyond that, there weren't many places a 21-year-old could simply vanish. Students organized searches of the university grounds. Hundreds turned out, hoping, looking. 4 days after Libby disappeared, her parents made a public appeal, asking her to come home, begging for information. Around that time, detectives received reports of a possible sighting. CCTV footage appeared to show two people getting into a car. Was this the breakthrough? Who was the man seen with her? Then another development shifted the investigation. 3 women came forward, each with disturbing allegations. They described encounters with a man in the same area, sexual offenses, public indecency. Police already knew about him. For 18 months, a serial sexual predator had been operating in the student neighborhoods. The earliest report dated back to July 2017. A woman saw a man watching her through a window late at night. When confronted, he ran. Other reports followed. Voyeurism, peering into windows, targeting student houses, burglaries, stealing laptops, cameras, but also underwear, sex toys. These weren't random crimes. They were sexually motivated, and the behavior escalated. Each time he wasn't caught, he grew bolder, more dangerous. When investigators mapped the offenses, a pattern emerged, nearly all within a small area, dense with student housing. They believed he knew exactly who lived there, who he was targeting. As Libby Squire remained missing, one question loomed larger than all the others. Was the man who had been watching the same man who had taken her? Word of the attack spread quickly through student houses, down local streets, into everyday conversation. There was a growing sense that someone was out there, watching, waiting. People knew a predator was operating in the area, someone who targeted women as they socialized, as they walked home, as they let their guard down. What made him especially disturbing was how deliberate he was about being seen. This wasn't just about committing sexual offenses. He wanted his victims to know they were being watched. He left calling cards, ensured eye contact, made sure they saw him as he exposed himself in the street. Fear was part of the thrill. Even when confronted sometimes by 2 or 3 women, he didn't retreat. He didn't run. He continued. He wanted them to see him and to remember him. As the search for Libby continued, one question dominated everything. Had she crossed paths with this man? Was he the figure captured on CCTV? Behind the scenes, 2 investigations were unfolding at once. Publicly, it was a missing person inquiry. Privately, detectives were treating it as an abduction. Identifying the car seen near Libby became the priority. 5 days after she vanished, there was a breakthrough. Specialist officers reviewing CCTV noticed something strange. The same vehicle appeared again and again, circling, lingering, It had been moving slowly through the Newland Avenue area from early evening on the night Libby disappeared, stopping only to refuel. A silver Vauxhall Astra. It matched footage of a car seen later on Hayworth Street, parked briefly, then driving away with two people inside. Investigators went back, frame by frame. Eventually, they found a license plate. The registration led to a name, a 24-year-old man, a Polish national who, on the surface, seemed entirely ordinary. He'd grown up in a small village in northern Poland, one of 8 children, a strict religious upbringing, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. He moved to the UK, married, had 2 young children. He worked in a meat processing factory about 20 miles from Hull. Nothing about him stood out. He had no criminal record in the UK, no arrests, no DNA on file, but detectives were suspicious enough to knock on his door. Late on the evening of February 6th, officers went to his home on Raglan Street. By the early hours of the next morning, police confirmed they had arrested a suspect, a man held on suspicion of Libby's abduction. By then, she'd been missing for a week. Her bank cards hadn't been used. Her phone was gone. Was she still alive? As some detectives questioned him, others made a discovery, something that changed the entire case. In the boot of his car, officers found a pink holdall. Inside, women's underwear, photographs of women taken during break-ins, trophies, evidence of sexually motivated burglary stretching back 18 months. When he was arrested, his DNA was taken as routine. Fingerprints, samples. That's when the picture snapped into focus. His DNA matched samples recovered from discarded condoms found around the neighborhood months earlier. The same offender. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a missing student. It revealed a hidden life, a pattern of stalking, voyeurism, sexual escalation. He was eventually charged with 13 offenses, including incidents just weeks before Libby vanished, targeting student houses, stealing intimate items, exposing himself in public. To those who knew him, the revelations were shocking. Family described him as quiet, polite, avoidant of conflict. His mother said he was sensitive, that the sight of blood made him faint. His sister said he was devoted to the women in his life, loyal, gentle. No one recognized the man police were now describing, but investigators were no longer asking who he was. They were asking something far more urgent. What role had he played in Libby Squire's final hours? Relish's family would later learn that the sexual offending was only the beginning. Police questioned him for days. Extensions were granted so detectives could keep him in custody. They needed time. When the charge finally came, on the Sunday evening, it wasn't what the public expected. People assumed it would be abduction or murder. Instead, he was charged with a series of sexual offenses, voyeurism, outraging public decency. Serious crimes, yes, but none of them directly connected to Libby's disappearance. The most recent offense dated back just days before the night Libby vanished. He was charged on February 10th, and he denied knowing anything about Libby Squire. 10 days after she disappeared, he claimed he had no idea where she was, no idea what had happened to her. Despite his arrest, detectives were no closer to finding Libby. There was nothing yet that placed them together. So they went back to the footage, hour after hour, frame by frame. They traced Libby's movements through the night, speaking to strangers, turning down offers of help. It was clear people were worried about her, but she hesitated, accepted help one moment, pulled away the next. Cold, confused, unsure who to trust. She sat on a bench at the junction of Beverly Road and Haworth Street for nearly 10 minutes. A passing motorist saw her sitting in the snow, tried to help, then drove away. At 11:57 p.m., CCTV showed Libby walking again, heading south along Beverly Road. Tragically, she was walking back toward safety, back toward home. She staggered, uneven on her feet, drifting from one side of the road to the other. She had no way of knowing someone was watching her. At the same time, police were reconstructing the movements of Pavel Relish that same evening. At 8:00 p.m., he told his wife he was going out, said he was exercising. He wasn't dressed for exercise. At 8:35, he was seen at a petrol station, fueling up. Police would later understand what that meant. He wasn't running. He was cruising. At 9:11 p.m., his car turned toward Oak Road playing fields, an area that would soon become central to the investigation. CCTV built a disturbing picture. Him driving slowly, stopping, getting out. These were places where he had offended before. That night, he later admitted, he was looking for what he called easy sex. There was no evidence he succeeded until just before midnight. At 11:55 p.m., a grainy clip changed everything. A camera overlooking the corner near Howard Street captured his car pulling in. By chance, he parked at the dead end of the road, just steps from where Libby was sitting. He couldn't have seen her when he parked. He got out of the car. On the footage, you see him walk past her, deliberately, as if he hadn't noticed her at all. He crossed the road, disappeared into the shadows of Beresford Avenue, and waited. He watched to see if she was alone, to see if anyone was with her. This was the moment he decided. As Libby stood and began walking, CCTV shows him emerging from the shadows, not crossing directly to her side, keeping to the tree line, staying hidden, stalking her. She turned into a dark, quiet entrance off Beverly Road. That's when he moved. He crossed quickly, intercepted her. Now they were walking side by side, back down the road. He was close, talking, offering help. Libby was distressed, disoriented. He preyed on that. At 12:02 a.m., they passed under the light of a bus stop. For the first time, both silhouettes were clear. His bulky frame, her slight one. They were heading back toward Howard Street, toward his car. There's no audio, no way to know what he said, but investigators believe he persuaded her to go with him. The footage cuts to his car. The lights flash. He unlocks it. Then something interrupts. Another vehicle pulls into the street. A group of men inside, by chance alone. He doesn't act. Instead, he sits in his car, door open, feet on the pavement, and waits, waiting for the street to clear, waiting for his moment. Detectives believe there was a moment just out of camera view when Libby hesitated, standing on the pavement, unsure. It may have been the last chance she had to escape the danger she'd unknowingly stepped into. At the top of the road sat another car, 3, maybe 4 men inside, witnesses. Ravitch didn't want them to see what he was about to do, so he waited. For a long stretch of time, he sat quietly in the passenger seat of his car, door open, legs out, watching. The second that other car pulled away from Hayworth Street, he moved, up, out of the car, straight toward Libby. The next section of footage is crucial and painfully unclear. It's heavily enhanced, grainy, indistinct. 2 figures come together. Investigators would later describe it as a struggle, tugging, pulling. Common sense pointed in one direction. Libby's watch was found on the road at that spot, not broken, simply torn from her wrist. Something forceful had happened there. Detectives told the jury they believed this was the moment she was forced into the car. She disappears from view. He gets into the driver's seat. The car pulls away. Back onto Beverly Road, it was a grim sign. All the while, Ravitch continued to deny wrongdoing. Where was Libby Squire? What did he know? Then another witness came forward. A man who lived near the Oak Road playing fields. He reported hearing desperate screams from a woman in the early hours. By now, CCTV had already exposed Ravitch as a liar. In his first police interviews, he insisted he'd never met Libby. Later, he changed his story. He admitted picking her up, said she was distressed, claimed he was only trying to help her get home. According to him, she made advances. He rejected her, said he was married. He claimed she got out of the car, that he never saw her again. Police didn't believe him, but they still needed proof. More CCTV was reviewed. This time, footage near Oak Road playing fields. At just after midnight on February 1st, a silver hatchback is seen arriving. The same car. Only fragments are visible. A headlight. A brief flash. But the timing mattered. It placed him at the playing fields minutes after Libby was last seen. 8 or 9 minutes later, the car is seen leaving. That narrowed the search area. But it also narrowed hope. The River Hall lay less than 500 yards away. Searches intensified. Witness evidence began to align. A young man living in the only house bordering the playing fields told police he'd been woken from sleep, At 14 minutes past midnight, he heard a woman screaming, desperate, terrified. Minutes later, he saw a man leaving the area, not running, but walking quickly, purposefully. He didn't look back. There was enough light to make out his build, his clothes. When shown photographs weeks later, the witness was confident. It was Ravitch. Detectives believed this was the attack and the killing. Only one person was seen returning to the car. If Libby wasn't found nearby, there was only one explanation. She had gone into the river. Without a body, police couldn't charge him with murder. Weeks passed. Then, 7 weeks later, the answer came. Libby's body was found in the water off Spurn Point, carried from the River Hoe, out through the Humber, and into the North Sea. She was recovered by a lifeboat crew. There were small details that told him it was her. A slender gold necklace. The letter L formal test confirmed it. Libby Squire. Only then could police begin a murder investigation. After weeks in the water, it was uncertain what evidence remained. Pathologists worked carefully. Prosecutors waited. In the meantime, Ravitch faced trial for the terror he had already inflicted on Hull's student community. He appeared in court charged with voyeurism, public decency offenses, and burglary. At first, he denied everything. His trial was moved away from Hull due to public anger. Then, on the day it was set to begin, he changed his plea. Guilty. But the most important charge still hadn't been laid. He was first sentenced for the sexual offenses alone, 8.5 years. On appeal, that was reduced to 5.5. By the time he was 3 months into that sentence, the results of Libby's postmortem came back. It couldn't establish exactly how she died, but it revealed something else. His semen was found on a high vaginal swab. That single finding changed everything. He had told police there was no sexual contact, that he left her alive, that nothing happened. The evidence proved he was lying. It proved Libby had been raped. For detectives at Humberside Police, this was the missing piece. They charged him with murder, alleging that after the assault at the Oak Road playing fields, he threw Libby into the river. Prosecutors said he believed the water would erase her, that the river would carry her away, that no one would ever know. He knew the area. He knew the tides. He thought the Humber would do the rest. He was wrong. 9 months after Libby disappeared, he was charged with rape and murder. He denied both. In January 2021, he went on trial at Sheffield Crown Court. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The attention was intense, national, relentless. For Libby's family, it was about answers, about truth, about justice. Prosecutors laid out the case carefully, methodically. CCTV was central. Ravitch's lies were exposed one by one. He changed his story repeatedly, denied contact, then admitted contact, denied sex, then claimed it was consensual. He never accepted responsibility. He maintained his version to the end. His claim was simple. He said Libby initiated sex, that it was consensual, that he left her safe and well, that he was a good Samaritan who made a mistake. The jury didn't believe him. Prosecutors presented further CCTV hours of footage showing him roaming the student area after Libby's death, walking, lingering, offending again. A used condom found nearby contained his DNA. When he took the stand, he admitted something else. He said that after sex with Libby, he was still unsatisfied, that he went looking for another woman. The jury rejected his account. He was unanimously convicted of rape, and by an 11-to-1 majority convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 27 years. For Libby's parents, the verdict brought no comfort. Nothing could bring her back. They had wanted the truth. They never got it. Ravitch never told them what really happened. A review later concluded police had handled earlier reports proportionately. The streets around Wellesley Avenue remain busy. Students still live there. Life continues. But the memory lingers. There was a sense that it could have been anyone. Any woman alone. Any night. Ravitch believed he could disappear into the city, that the river would hide his crime. Instead, it was the city that exposed him, frame by frame, camera by camera. When Libby Squire's body surfaced in the Humber estuary, it became impossible to deny the truth. The evidence was finally undeniable. In the end, his mistake was simple. He forgot that cities like Hull are watching. If this case held your attention, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps keep these stories coming. Thank you for watching.